Hey, welcome to Open News, everyone. Welcome back to Tortoise. Since we last convened for one of these open sessions at lunchtime, vaccines have been coming at us from all angles. We've got more tears than a wedding cake. Lucy Huberman's gossip last week about the rules of Christmas seems pretty close to the mark, and we're looking like we're going to get an announcement today. And like the hair dye slowly rolling down Rudy Giuliani's face, the Trump administration is dribbling away. But, you know, the messy cleanup's going to take some time, and that's what we're here for. So I think we've got an hour. We can try and work out what should be on our agenda. We've got a few thoughts ourselves, but as you know, this is your meeting. It's a chance to pitch, to shape what we're covering and how we do it. And I'm hoping if you have a look in the chat, we should give you a little view of our news list there. You'll see what we're interested in. And certainly getting past the stalling of Trump is a key thing for us. We want to look ahead at what might change under Biden. And I think especially interested in the climate change issue. And obviously there are implications for the UK's relationship with the US there. But if you'll indulge me, first of all, I'd like to come to Chris Cook, who's only with us for the first half today. And I really wanted to talk about one of his specialist subjects as a reporter, which is the Grenfell fire. He covered a lot of that when he was at the BBC, and you know his work was generally seen to be ahead of the pack. And it just sort of strikes me that, you know, the second phase of the inquiry is going on, and you know, maybe we've stopped registering how significant it is. It doesn't really seem to be punching through at the level that it ought to be. So I'm keen to know from Chris, if he's here, what's going on this week in particular, and what are we missing? Chris,
So I think one of the big thing that's happened is that we've moved into the phase of the inquiry that's going to look, if you like, at the structural factors that led to the fire, right? So we've had a load of stuff about the night itself, and this is really about the building and how things got to be where they were. And there was the thing that came out last week that was sort of unsurprising, but still shocking to actually hear it confirmed with, you know, from the actual companies at the center of this, was the extent to which companies were aggressively lobbying in some cases, and in other cases to create loopholes in the law so they could sell basically more flammable products, and how how other companies then use those loopholes. So one of the things we kept hearing about when I was reporting on this was that there's a company called Kingspan, which is one of the bigger insulation makers. So it makes a plastic insulation, not that sort of stuff you've probably got in your loft, the sort of mineral woolly stuff, the old-fashioned stuff, but the plastic plates. And there's one kind of it called phenolic insulation, and they're basically the only people that make it. And one of the things that emerged was they were revealed as basically the key lobbyists for on standards,
right.
because they wanted to make it possible for you to use their insulation in on the side of buildings, on the side of tall buildings. Now their insulation, you should be clear, is not if you put a lighter to it or a blowtorch, it will carry the flame briefly and then go out. Like it doesn't it's not like putting petrol on the side of your house. But if there's something else that can carry a flame next to it, it's a dangerous thing to have nearby, because it can add fuel to that fire as it's going. It will naturally go out, but it can make a fire nearby worse, basically, is what it's all the stuff. And one of the things that emerged last week was that Celotex, who were the people that made the insulation that went on Grenfell, had basically exploited some of these loopholes. And in fact, what had happened is they had put forward their insulation for a test. So, and when you put them forward for these tests, they're testing a specific design, right? So I want to prove that Celotex is safe to be used in circumstances A and B and C, where the paneling around it is made of this, and where the bolts are made of this, and the wall behind it is concrete. They're not like generic tests. And it turns out they failed the test. They didn't tell anyone about it, and they don't have to. That's one of the weird things about our rule book. They then got a test passed on a sort of easier basis, right, with more fireproof other stuff around it. And they then told other people that based on that test, you could use it in circumstances which, based on the first test, we know they couldn't.
It actually failed. Wow.
Yeah. So that's the problem, right? It's that the way that fire regulations work is they say you could do these tests that say my insulation works if you pair it with that material and that material and that material. And we've got a rule that basically says if what you're doing is really close to that, and it's a tweak, maybe a cosmetic tweak, you don't have to retest it. And you need to get an engineer to sign off on the fact you don't have to retest it.
So it's like a desktop exercise in the end. Right.
Exactly. But the problem is that basically there are loads of engineers who, it turns out, will simply write that about anything. So we found examples when we were looking at this in 2017 where someone had got a test done with ceramic tile over flammable insulation, right? So it was concrete wall, insulation, and then ceramic tile. So two really fireproof things either side of the insulation. And then they had used that to argue that actually you can have concrete wall, insulation, and then flammable outer panels, which are obviously a completely different fire structure. And that went up. That was on a building in Portsmouth. Some student housing in Portsmouth was put up on that basis.
Yeah.
And the thing that sort of emerged suddenly over the last week is the extent to which Kingspan was pushing for an understanding of the rules that basically assumed all of this stuff was kind of safe and like this is all pettifogging nonsense. Like, don't worry too much about this stuff. And the way that Celotex was aggressively using the fact that tests are confidential to get their stuff onto buildings in circumstances we now know really clearly they shouldn't have been.
And I think we're also starting to see. Am I right? There's a former Kingspan employee who's been on the witness stand for a day or two, I think, and he's been essentially said. I mean, we know there are always wrinkles and extenuating circumstances, but this is a guy who's alleging that he lost his job after effectively internally whistleblowing about the lack of safety of their products, and he was sort of he was rather scathingly kind of dismissed as someone who wasn't very supportive of their products.
So there are two of them actually. So there's one last week from Saint-Gobain, which is Celotex, and there's one this week from Kingspan.
Yeah.
And my experience of it was that Kingspan were the ones who literally turn up and see you, like mob-handed, to make their views known to you, whereas Celotex basically weren't talking to anyone. And I think that's the sort of the dynamics of it. So Celotex is much more important for understanding the specifics of Grenfell Tower, because that's the stuff that was most of the material on Grenfell. There was a bit of Kingspan, but not very much. But Kingspan are more important for understanding, if you like, the structure of the building industry. What's really absurd is we literally are already reforming building codes based on the Hackett review when we haven't obviously finished. We're going to have to re-reform them after this, I suspect. I think the really big thing that's emerging at the moment is the importance of secrecy in all this. The fact that Kingspan and Celotex, Saint-Gobain could test their material in one context. They could find it wasn't safe enough to be used in a building, and then they could bury that result, test it in a different context, and then pass it with that, and then use that result to justify using it back in the original circumstance, which they know it was unsafe for.
Yes.
It's just
so I suppose that really begs the question: is this heading anytime soon for a criminal court?
So, I mean, I think everyone has, from the beginning, it's always been said that the the people most in trouble legally are the it's either Riley. I could be the name. There's a company called Harley Facades which actually put these stuff up on the building, but they're assumed to be okay because they weren't actually in charge of sort of building design. It's the I've completely forgotten the name of the contractor.
Well, let's
but the lead contractor are the people who are expected to be in more trouble. It's actually going to be really, really hard to prove that one of these insulation companies are the ones who need to take the blame, not least because the responsibility for making sure that the final design had proper certification, which it didn't, wasn't theirs.
I see. Well, Chris, thank you so much for allowing us inside your brain, because I always love the way it works. I think it's one for discussion for us, but I can't help feeling that there is because we have you in our fold, and because this inquiry has unfolded at a quite a sort of stately process. It seems made for Tortoise to go back and say, what have we learned, and where is this going?
Ryden. It was Ryden. Sorry, Nicholas points out I keep calling it Ryden.
Right. There you go.
2 years and your brain goes completely to mush.
Yeah.
I think secrecy is the big thing. Everything here is about secrecy. Everything is about what you're allowed to do in private, and how can you keep any system safe where people are allowed to conduct tests in private.
Well, there you go. There's our working brief for now then, and I hope that's might be an actual story that comes out of this meeting, because after all, that's what we're here for. I can see though, it's Chris, thank you, and I know you've got to go off and do some other stuff, so much appreciated. I can see, I'm hesitating to jump into this straight away, but I can see that some debate about the phrase compassionate conservatives is going on in the chat, and I think at least some people are seeking a definition there. So I think we might get to that in a moment or two. But what I'd love to do next, though, is just sort of return to the consequences of elections. And I know Giles Wattell is with us. We're keen to push past Trump and his obfuscation and move on to things that might flow from here, the reset, as it were, for the US. And I think it is good to just talk about Joe Biden and climate change. And I wonder, Giles, if you're with us, where you think he will start to try and make good what's happened in the last 4 years.
I think, well, he'll start with Paris. Day one, executive order reversing the US withdrawal from that process. Just backing up, 10 days ago, I took part in a Zoom call with a bunch of American journalists who were already wringing their hands, tearing their hair out about that Trump obfuscation, the process that they're in the middle of. Terrible week for American democracy. And I said, wait, hang on, from over here, we're already thinking about the positives, and we hadn't sort of got dragged back into the Trump mire at that point. And one of them that seemed very obvious to me was what I just mentioned, this what he can do at a stroke to reverse the American position that is obtained for the last 4 years on climate change. You no longer have a denier in the White House. You no longer have an enabler of regressive environmental policies, particularly through the Department of the Interior, Bernhardt, his appointee there. And since that point, obviously, we've had the final grudging acceptance of reality last night by Trump. The transition can begin for real. He's named John Kerry as his climate envoy, and that is an interesting appointment. He's almost as old as Biden himself. There's good and bad there. So he's the first cabinet level climate envoy the US has had, an indication of the importance that Biden attaches to the issue, whether because of his gut feeling or because he knows he has to now, because so much has changed on the American left in the last 4 years. And he's under an obligation, in a sense, to be a radical progressive as much as he can do, in return for the nomination, in a sense. Kerry, remember, was the American diplomat who brought American muscle to bear in Paris in 2015. And let's just remember what that consisted of. It was binding commitments to come up with targets, not binding commitments to achieve them.
I mean, would that was how our own lives were run. I would make those binding commitments to aspire to targets all the time.
So, and then, excuse me, I'm hoping that my dog now leaves. Yeah. Forgive me while I close the door so he can't get back in.
I mean, it's possible that our cat might join in as well, but
sorry, I'm alone in the house and he's bigger than me.
All right, good.
So he has experience, and internationally, tremendous respect Kerry does. But the big question is, what does he and Biden and the agenda, their agenda, can they hope to achieve domestically? Let's remember that the campaign, sort of their equivalent of a manifesto, included a $2 trillion Build Back Better scheme, much of which is not directly environmental, but a lot of which is. So that covers infrastructure investment, everything from crumbling roads to carbon fiber, electrification of cars, public transport, clean power, green buildings, research and development, smart agriculture. Now, some of that is achievable with executive orders. And I was just reading that a former advisor to George Bush expects a Tet offensive of executive orders. But they, of course, are reversible by the next president.
Of course. This is the dance we've been playing for the last 4 years, isn't it?
Yeah. And that plays into, just returning to the international stage, the erosion of trust in the US as a partner in climate negotiations. You can have all the admiration and trust that you like with a particular administration, but if it's simply going to cycle back to a Trump-esque administration in 2024, it doesn't amount to much. But after executive orders, there's then the question of how much can be tagged onto budget legislation, which is generally exempt the filibuster 60 vote requirement and can get through the Senate with 50+1. So that would have Vice President Kamala Harris making the casting vote.
If they win these 2 special elections in Georgia, right?
Yes, they may be absolutely. Yes, and that comes down, as I was reading this morning, to 23. It could come down to 23,000 17-year-olds turning 18 by January, who they're frantically trying to recruit on the assumption that they'll all vote Democrat. I suspect that there are some kids about to turn 18 who are actually Republican in Georgia. But anyway.
But it is true, actually, just to take that lovely cul-de-sac. It's true that young voters really swung that election in Georgia in the presidential race. The sign up was astonishing, and you know, as you say, I mean, it's sort of finding new voters has been the story of November 2020, and that Georgia race, those 2 Georgia races go on in the 5th of January, I think, when the balance of the Senate will be decided.
Yes.
But yes, I interrupt you anyway. So what we're saying really is that getting legislation through the Hill is going to be tremendously difficult, and particularly if it's very, very daring, if it really was targeting fossil fuels in a
Right.
way that left Republicans queasy and susceptible to all the lobbyists that we know are so
So
professional.
I suspect, and just one last thing is, we'll get quite quickly to a point where Biden, the old school poll, will get into bargaining with Mitch McConnell and others in the Senate about what can actually be achieved. It is said that he has a good working relationship with McConnell and was therefore Obama's go-between with McConnell. I'm sorry, in the first part of the Biden administration, of the Obama administration. That might yield something. He won't want to suffer badly in the 2022 midterms as Obama did in 2012, and that will mean being less than radical on climate in the Rust Belt.
And again, just to apologies for boring on about this, but there's also some really delicious maths in the House as well, because the Dems only just got over the line. I think they've got 222. It means they've got a majority of about 4, and the most famous 4 members of the progressive wing we have the potential to hold them to ransom. It's sort of, for people who can remember, it's like shades of the dying days of John Major over Europe. Every vote becomes a sort of life or death vote of confidence. So,
and all up for re-election every 2 years, including there are some Democrat congressmen and women from energy states, the Western Pennsylvania, West Virginia. It'll be on a knife edge. Yes.
Okay, so that's all to look forward to for those of us who care about that stuff. But let's just think about the if you would, before we sort of throw it open to the room, just think about Britain, Boris Johnson, Biden, post-Brexit trade. Is there something here where we can genuinely claim to be world leaders, and are there is this an avenue towards some kind of global role for Britain?
Oddly, yes. I say oddly because this particular government, the Johnson government, has a habit of over-promising and under-delivering, and the Prime Minister himself loves this irritating rhetoric of world-class, world-beating in relation to things like driverless cars, when we're way off the pace. It's nothing of the sort. It's insulting to listen to. But over the past 5 years or so, for some reason, the UK has not tooted its own horn as much as I think it could have done on the very basic or very remarkable achievement of cutting overall carbon emissions from its power sector in particular, very, very substantially, faster than anywhere in the world. I mean, in a sense, to comply with legal requirements, but nonetheless, we are world leaders in that respect. And Johnson's recent 10-point Build Back Better plan includes some radical proposals. He's brought forward by 10 years, just for example, the deadline for phasing out sale of new petrol and diesel vehicles to 2030. So we're in line with the most aggressive reformers in Europe on that front now. My sense is that hitherto that 10-point plan really hasn't been taken seriously for good reasons. I mean, Johnson has depleted the sort of trust in his account quite quickly. But on the face of it, I mean, if you just look at the undertakings on paper, they're ambitious. And one point that I drew attention to in this morning's news list is a sort of green recovery pledges tracker that Carbon Brief has set up. And there are a lot of Union Jacks in the left-hand margin there. There are as many, and then if you read across, these are projects that have been defined, funded, and launched. Whereas most of the others, whether they're EU or other EU member states, there are none from the US, by the way, yet, are sort of mooted or planned, projected. So long answer to your question. I think whereas there's a lot of embarrassment to be got over in the UK-US relationship, you know, they've got to get past all the mutual mistrust over Brexit, for example. They might find common ground on the environment, on climate.
Just give me the 10-second pitch, Giles. What would be the story that you would want to go after out of all of that?
Oh, crikey. Well, I mean, to be very honest, it's the US end that interests me more than the UK, just because it has the power to change things. And the question, I think the big question is, can Biden-Kerry make China commit to anything substantial in Glasgow next year? That's the question. It's not a story, but it's a question.
And that's, again, for those for people following along, you're not talking about the Euros in June at Hampden. You're talking about COP26, aren't you?
I am. Good.
Glad we clarified that. Excellent, Giles. Thank you. You should probably go and attend to the dog if you.
No, he knows he's in the doghouse now.
Excellent work. Good. Well, look, I think I mean, you know the drill by now. Do put your hand up or do sort of join in on the chat. I think what if this is to conform to the conventions of a real news meeting, and it's surely that. What has to happen next is Giles and I go silent, and someone else pipes up and says, "Well, based on everything that Giles just said, here's what I'm interested in." So I'm going to give you a few seconds to pluck up your courage, but that's how this should go. Someone should pick the ball up and run with it. But while you're thinking up,
Dave, can I just apologise to Lucy for the way I introduced Biden? It was a shorthand way of saying this is a face from the past, which may be in and of itself a problem for the younger generation, the AOCs that James is talking about in the chat.
Yes.
So I apologise for that.
No, and I think Lucy, good. I know you're vigilant on this issue, and I think it's right. We can slip into ageism all too readily. Look, there's Tessa Murray with a little blue hand waving. Tess, what do you want to pitch in on?
I was just thinking across from the climate stuff with John Kerry to Iran. I'm just wondering, what might happen there. No more thoughts than that.
But you're right though, that if I mean, we've the challenge for us is it doesn't take long to if you've been in a newsroom to sort of come up with a news list for January of things that will be relevant when inauguration happens. But it's that challenge of finding a little bit of space for yourself, isn't it? Because everybody's going to be doing, what's the sort of first 100 days look like on the home front? What's the first 100 days look like in the world? And
just when I see John Kerry in my mind, I see him in Iran. And I think about all the stuff we've done on Evan, all the stuff we've done.
Well, that's right.
And also just frankly the fact that the geopolitics of the region are changing so rapidly, and without necessarily getting into the sort of Middle East peace conversation again, what's the slightly more kind of left of center issues in the region, Yemen, Iran, the sort of Saudi Israeli sort of link. You know, it feels like a very different world into which Kerry's going this time round.
Yes,
feels like
and,
a lot's
and again,
changed.
and you know, layer upon layer of mistrust as well.
Yeah, and proxy wars and Qatar and all that stuff.
Yeah, absolutely. So yes, I don't disagree. There's something there, isn't there? I wondered, you know, I mean, we've been fortunate enough to have a few sort of diplomats kind of come through the doors at Tortoise, and people who really understand how those deals are put together. I do wonder whether there's you know, we should be going round our contacts in that sense and just trying to see what the mood is and what the, you know, to get to your how is America being viewed in the Middle East right now, and what are the obstacles to progress. I think everyone's talked straight away about the fact that Tony Blinken, the new Secretary of State, is going to be regarded as, you know, firstly an intellect and you know, and someone who really does believe in the proper avenues of diplomacy. But you know, he's got some bridge building to do, I would have thought. I'm just going to go to Mehdi, who's got his hand up. I wonder if you're on point or whether you're going to take us somewhere different.
No, hi, David. Just wanted to clarify what Tessa just said, that all the noises coming from Washington, from the Democrats, is that they are looking further on the JCPOA, which is the Iran deal.
Mm.
They are already talking about JCPOA plus.
Mm-hmm.
Therefore, they want to extend the scope of the original deal, which from little I know, it is not acceptable to Iran. They are asking for essentially to go through the first phase, to finish the first phase. It's got a sunset and what you have. There is no way that they are going after the punishment they've already taken, that they will actually give more. Therefore, the composition with Tony Black, the Secretary of State elect, if you like, that it doesn't seem to be a determination to actually go back and trying to build confidence. It seems that they want to squeeze more, and that is dangerous. That for the region, that is dangerous. Just quickly add, the Saudi Arabian foreign minister has actually asked, they want to take part. They want to be a participant in the negotiation. And he's asking for the JCPOA plus. We are somehow going onto a wrong, dangerous path. Whether it's wrong or right is not for me to judge. But the determination somehow in Washington does not seem to be there. And as you said, lack of trust, which is perhaps the main thing. The Iranians do not trust the Washington, whatever party or whatever hue they
is the first step, do you think, the lifting of the sanctions that Trump imposed?
Absolutely. And what Trump has been doing, and they are going to do in the next 2 months, to impose further sanctions. And the nature of the sanctions are that they are going to be very difficult to be reversible. It's not the kind of a sanction, as Jad was saying, that yes, an executive order to put some action and another executive order to actually take it off. But they are engineering the forthcoming sanctions in the next 60 days. That'll be very difficult for the Democrats to actually reverse.
Yeah. I mean, I think this is going to be, in some ways, the story of the first year, at least, of this administration in the US, that they're going to be having to do a lot of tidying up and a lot of reparation work before they can even properly get started. Thank you for that. Thank you for that, indeed. And again, you know, please, if anyone wants to chip in and say, not only express an opinion, but express a view on how we should approach story like Iran from here, then I'm all ears. I'm going to go to Yasmin, if I may, for a moment, if you're there. I can see there's a lively conversation going on about AOC and that progressive wing of the Dems, and clearly she and her squad, as we should maybe call them, are certainly pushing to try and really exercise some muscle at the moment. But Yasmin, what's on your mind?
I think it's interesting, if folks haven't read the piece. It was an interview with AOC shortly after the election, and there was also an interview with her recorded for The Daily, which is their sort of the New York Times daily podcast. And it's sort of where she's essentially making the argument that the Democrats, in the institution of the party, doesn't support the more progressive movement, and even within the party, and even though they get lots of external support, the squad gets lots of external support, it's a real fight within the party itself. And she was kind of making the case that unless Biden turns up and actually backs all the people who helped get him elected, the Black women, et cetera, that population is going to be more and more disenfranchised. They might not turn up again. And so the Democrats shouldn't just take their support for granted, but should really kind of lean into the politics that of the sort of more left, the more progressive. Whereas then if you kind of, when they did the podcast, they also had somebody from the more moderate part of the party, and he was sort of saying, well, actually, no, I don't think that that's the way to go. And I think there's an interesting analogy. I don't know the UK politics well enough to draw the direct analogy with the Labour Party here, but I think there's definitely this kind of sense that, well, it seems to me from the outside, there's this sense that, okay, the left side of the Labour Party had its chance. We're going to sort of be a bit more moderate or a bit more centre-left perhaps, and that's going to be the route to election, that's going to be the route to power. But I mean, the AOCs, even though they're really supported, and the squad, even though they're really supported from the outside, I do get the sense that they're also crushed a little bit by the machine of the party. And where does that lead people? What does that, where does that sort of leave folks who in any context want to be more progressive, but don't feel like they have the space to do so within the institution? It's a huge challenge.
Absolutely. And I mean, there's an interesting dynamic and tension as well, isn't there? That actually there are more than several Democrats who are towards the center of the party who are saying that, progressive left cost us seats in the House. And the whole question around that phrase, defund the police, which I think most of us understand, is a lot more nuanced than it sounds in 3 words. It's actually about a redirection of money from frontline policing towards, things like housing and education, which you would think many people could easily get behind, but in practice that became a real problem issue, a thorn in the side for some Democrats towards the center. So again, there's a feeling that it's really into politics. It's a delicious sort of dilemma, isn't it? That on the one hand, AOC and her group are empowered by the fact that the majority is so small, and yet they are in bad odor with the kind of ruling cadre, if you like, of the House Democrats.
What's also interesting about it is that one could argue that Trump and Trumpism wasn't reflective of a broader Republican position, but when the party saw that there was a route to power, they were like, all right, we're just going to get behind this, even if we think it's distasteful, even if we think, wasn't there, I think even Tortoise did the piece on the evangelicals and how the evangelicals were like, we don't really back any of his moral activity and how he conducts himself, but he's going to get us what we want, and so we're going to back him. And so there's this kind of focus on, let's just get to the power that we need to, and a less of a willingness to do that, I think, on the other, or not a belief that will be a route to power on the other side of the aisle. And it also means that I think there's still a huge chunk of folks who don't feel like there is a natural home for them in either the Democrats or the Labour Party here in the UK. And so, I mean, it's something that I sit and wonder where that kind of leaves. Does that mean we're going to look again to a future that is economically and socially conservative, with even if it's in the guise of a left-wing party?
What's the piece you would commission, Yasmin?
Oh gosh, I'd be really interested in what the discussions are, like what is going, like I would love to know the tea of the internal politics right now, of how the negotiations are being had, who is pulling on what levers, who is making which compromises, like is Biden kind of going to actually push the squad out slowly, or is it going to, or are we actually going to see part of the agenda, say, of the more progressive wing become more and more mainstream, and see a bit of those machinations happening?
There was, I think, in the last 24 hours, Dianne Feinstein is saying she's going to step down from chairing or the lead role in the Judiciary Committee, which is like seen as the most powerful Senate committee, and that's to do with her giving some backhanded praise to the Republicans, and which just inflamed the progressives. So there's a little straw in the wind there. We won't make anything of the fact that she's 87. So, well, thank you for that, Yasmin. Nimo, I can see that you've been in the chat on similar territory. Tell me what you want to read.
Oh, what I want to read. Wow, lots of things. I think that I would personally, like, in this vein of, like, in the chat, I've been talking about AOC and progressives, and quickly mentioned like defunding the police and stuff like that. I think I'd want to look at like what these phrases like defund the police mean on the ground to people the people who actually came up with these phrases, the people who I don't think it's the same in the UK, but from what I've seen in America, it seems to be that a lot of the like activities, the protests, and any kind of community civil rights organizing happens by like really grassroots, community-based organizations, people who are literally from those neighborhoods, from those communities, who are garnering people's attention, who make town halls, who get people together, and like what defund the police means to them in a real, tangible, material way. I think I'd want to know what it looks like for their communities, how it would manifest, for them, how they feel comfortable, because I feel like these conversations happen in such a high-handed, abstract way, where we start talking about, you know, the philosophy of like whether we should have the police and all this kind of stuff, when most people are actually asking for very like you can make these things happen with policy changes that are tangible and that are material and that can happen fairly quickly if you just listen to the people on the ground. And so yeah, that's just, I'd want to read that. I'd want to hear those voices, because so often they are swamped by loads of people talking over them and them saying what they think defunding the police is, when policing has never really been an issue for them in their whole life.
Mm-hmm. Yeah, I think that's really interesting. One thing that really stayed with me, there's an old friend of mine who is a professor in Chicago, and he you know, he really is. He's African American. He's gay. He's radical left, and he was making the point that that centrists are the greatest enemies of progress, and because they fear pushing too far. And it's interesting that Obama, when he's doing his round of interviews around his book, is having to engage once again with were you radical enough? Did you push far enough? Were you too cautious? People have just seen this kind of slash and burn approach of Trump on the other side. I thought, why weren't we like that? You know, why didn't we, like, you had 8 years? And it of course it doesn't pay any heed to the realities of trying to square everything away on in the politics of Washington. But I thought it fascinating, and I also thought it fascinating that Obama yesterday in an interview turned straight away to something which is carved on the Lincoln memorial, which is his second inauguration, and it's that speech that he made in the sort of dying days of the Civil War about binding the nation's wounds, and Obama said that it was in that line, with malice toward none, with charity for all, that was the thing that informed everything that he did, and he clearly thought he could be a sort of across the aisle peacemaker, bringing America together, and perhaps one of the great ironies of his presidency is that he's he was such a lightning rod for some people that he caused greater division. It's so curious and fascinating. Where shall we go next? Lucy, I think I can see you engaging up and down the various sort of arguments that are being had in the chat. I wonder if you've got anything to bring to the party today, and have you got any good gossip?
No, don't think I've got any gossip. I'm not sure how well my previous gossip is holding up either. So
is it not?
I think I shall refrain.
I thought it seemed credible.
All right.
What grabs you about this? Either or both the climate change questions that we're asking, or the or these where we're getting into, can you win from the left? Can you govern from the left?
I'm waiting for you to get into the Conservative Party, I think.
Oh, well, hey, kick us off.
Well, no, I think there was something in your news list that was debated a bit up the chat.
Mm-hmm.
I think you had something about compassionate conservatism.
Yes, and
people were wondering a little bit about that. We don't all have very long memories.
Yes, I think it's hovering around that that sort of construct of, are you a health or a wealth conservative? Do you care more about the economy or people's lives? And seemingly, does Rishi Sunak embody a little bit of both? Where that he's, I think James Harding has been very critical of him being a pound short and a week late all the way through all of this. But they're trying to balance the furlough with the prospect of tax increases, I beg your pardon. And we're going to see, I suppose, tomorrow him show his hand a little bit, aren't we, in the spending review. But I don't know if anyone's got any thoughts in that direction.
I have.
Go.
Well, I think they're trying to balance the interests within their party, the same as they did with Brexit.
Mm-hmm.
And I actually think something is very unspoken in the whole COVID debate about health and the economy, which I don't think we probably want to discuss, but I think it is about the price or the cost of a life. And it's very unpleasant.
Yeah.
But I think it is behind most of these debates. And I've just seen a few commentaries on Twitter by different people where ONS data is beginning to be, it looks like people are being a bit economical with the truth using ONS data. There's a long thread yesterday about the Daily Mail, which is not so unusual. But also Dr. Sarah Rasmussen, this may be better for your COVID inquiry, was sort of disaggregating commentary by Chris Whitty on data from schools, which looks like it's been cooked a bit in some statements.
Mm-hmm.
So I think, sorry, I don't know about compassionate conservatism. I mean, I think I do understand more about One Nation, Tories and the past, and this lot seem very different. But yeah, I think the debate, they're trying to make it a sort of a jollier debate and Christmas, but you know,
Yeah.
there've been an enormous amount of deaths and cases in the last couple of days.
Yes. Yeah.
So I find it very chilling, but that's all I have to say.
Well, listen, thank you for that. And I'm going to put Ian Campbell on the spot, who most recently typed in the chat at last. So Ian, what's on your mind?
No, what I was going to say was that so this out of the party, which is kind of what we were talking this week. This the pens a bit.
Ian, I'm really sorry what your line is. Your line is breaking up in a very difficult way. So I think we're probably going to have to move on. We're hearing every second word at best, I think. Yeah, I'm sorry about that. Well, look, let's persist though with the Tories. I'm really hoping some of our fine minds in the Tortoise newsroom are going to come and tell me what they want to report out the back of perhaps the spending review or these multiple tiers that we're all trying to get our head round. I don't know if anyone wants to volunteer themselves, or should I just go down this list? Barney McIntyre's here. You know lots. Are we going to unmute Barney? Is he stalling for time? Yeah, he's probably gone for a sneaky sandwich. Look, I'm going to play the blue hand game again. And even though you've spoken once already in this session, Mehdi, I'm going to come back to you.
Thank you, David. Just a brief comment on what Giles said earlier. I may have misunderstood him. If I did, I do apologize in advance. The announcement with respect to the banning of petrol and diesel cars, or the sale of, by 2030 or at 2030. By common consensus, it appears to be not a plan, but it was done in the way of resetting the clock for Boris's government after the departure of
that guy whose name we can't remember anymore. What was his name again?
Yes, indeed. And the point I'm trying to make, by just bringing the time scale or deadline by 10 days, by 10 years rather, and not having done any study with regard to the feasibility and whether we've got the infrastructure in the country to actually achieve that. It seems to be hugely irresponsible. I do realize that we do have a session this evening. Perhaps we'll be actually looking at this particular area. But I understood Giles saying that that was quite a momentous decision in a sense. And what I am challenging, that it was not well thought about, and it's something may not be achievable. And most importantly, he has not shown any money behind it. How the government, any ensuing government, is going to actually be able to achieve that without the proper financing. It needs a huge infrastructure.
Yeah, I think it is problematic, isn't it, that you know, he's got a credibility gap at the moment, Johnson. You know, everyone's seen his performance in the last few months, and it hasn't been very convincing. So that when it means that you have very limited kind of currency to kind of promote anything. And I think, you know, perhaps for you know, for the converted, it's fine, but for those who are to be persuaded, it's just very difficult to see past you know, a mistrust that we've all come to feel. Yeah, credibility absence with 4 exclamation marks, Louise Simpson. Come on then, Louise, like put me out my misery for the last 4 minutes. Why don't you tell me what you want to commission, what you think we should be doing on Tories, compassionate or otherwise?
Well, you can say anything about Johnson, because it's just a nightmare and it's a train crash and he's a train crash, and you can talk about his, I don't know, you can just anything about Johnson, people will read and enjoy. The bit in the chat that I did mention was this thing about Iran. I really don't know anything about the sort of history of Iran and America, and I really do think it might be worth, I don't know, can you give us a long view of the whole sort of context of this?
Yeah, it's interesting. We have done a couple of pieces. We did. I don't know whether you had a chance to see or indeed listen to the stuff we did on Evan Prison about 6 or 8 weeks ago, which essentially try to tell the story of through the story of this forbidding institution. But there's another good piece which, if you can dig around on our website for it, there was a great piece that that Peter Westmacott wrote for us. He's this unusual figure who has.
He's great.
Yeah, I mean, he's been not only the British ambassador in Washington, but he was also stationed in Iran in the 70s. I think he was number 2 there. Did quite the career. So I think he wrote a real sort of new readers start here kind of piece last year.
Well, I'll definitely look that out, and maybe other people will as a result of it, because I really just don't know, and I don't understand quite, why this long-lasting hostility has been there, except that Iran is a, revolutionary republic. Do you know what I mean? I just don't know why there's such an entrenched. I mean, Iran is a problem, yes, but would it have been less of a problem if it had been treated, more as not less as a pariah state? Well, but no, I'll definitely look those up, and I apologize for not, keeping up to date with all the wonderful things that you produce.
I think even though we're slow, sometimes it still feels like, there's a fire hose of stuff coming out, doesn't it? It's hard to keep up. Well, look, guys, I think we're coming to the end of today. I think we are still reaching for the piece that we do for January around inauguration and January the 20th. I do think there's a lot to be done on Biden and climate change, that probably we can bring something special to bear. But there's definitely been an appetite in this conversation for that, that reflection of British politics, of the Labour movement here. That those fracture lines and the purity tests that can come with them within the Democrats in the early days. So I think, people understandably who wanted to see Trump go want to see something profound and dramatic in its place, and it may be that disappointment lies ahead in that respect. But at least there's only about another month of those interminable emails from the Trump camp demanding more money to fund their legal defense fund, which seems to be polluting my inbox at the moment. So I think more on climate change. What's that connective tissue between the US and the UK? I am totally convinced that we should put Chris Cook on the trail on Grenfell again. And I think that's not bad for one news meeting of a Tuesday lunchtime. So we'll try again next week. Come with your ideas. Don't sit on your hands, and shape our stuff. It's the way forward. All right. Thanks, everyone. Cheers.